Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel where today we are going to do a full-length, non-spoilery review of The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin. So this book is an adult urban fantasy, and the whole premise is that cities have the ability to become alive. They get to a very specific point, they choose an avatar, they go through this birthing process, and then they are alive. And there is an ancient evil that is able to attack them in this very tiny window of this birthing process. But if this ancient evil is successful, then the city dies. So we get to follow New York as it is going through this birthing process to become alive. And things are complicated because there's not just one avatar like most cities, there are six. One for each borough, and then one for the city, the entire city altogether. And so they have to find each other and all come together for this process to be completed out. And in the meantime, they are vulnerable to this ancient evil's attacks. And the story goes from there. So first, let's talk about content warnings. And so we have an attempted sexual assault, and we also have a pair of characters who are pretty gigantic bigots. And like, there's no I don't think there is any group that they are not bigoted against, and we are inside one of their heads some of the time. So just fair warning. So let's talk about the world building, and this is really where N.K. Jemisin shines. This is absolutely a fantastic premise, and it really does kind of ride on the ability of this author to really build out multiple different things very well, and I think she did a very good job with it. So first up, she had to build up New York City as a city, like, for especially for people who have never been. And so, like, it's not just the feeling of the city as a whole, but the feeling of each individual borough and what makes it unique. Like, who lives there, who works there, what does it feel like? And that is a pretty tall order, but I think that N.K. Jemisin did an excellent job on this, so that even me, who sometimes gets confused about things, I was able to follow each individual borough pretty easily. And then part of this was like part of why this was so important to build up each individual borough is that the magic system is based off of this. So it's a very squishy magic system, but it's also, I thought, really cool. Like, basically, our avatars are able to direct the magic by basically embodying your typical person from their borough, if that makes sense. So an example of this would be, at one point, the Bronx is driving a car and is trying to get somewhere very fast and really isn't doing well following traffic laws. And so they start weaving in and out of traffic and like going way too fast. And then Brooklyn's in the passenger seat, and both the Bronx and Brooklyn are like out the windows shouting at cussing at people like who are going too slow. And just that embodiment of like that stereotypical Bronx or Brooklyn driver allows the magic to settle on the vehicle and, like, opens up holes in traffic that the Bronx can weave into, and that kind of thing. And I really I just think that's so cool. Like, that's such a cool thing. And there's so many more examples of it in this book, and I just love it. I think that that's such a cool magic system, and it really, like, part of why it works so well is because N.K. Jemisin did such a great job building up, like I said, the feel of each individual borough. So, and then the last thing that she kind of had to build up was this fantastical element of who is this ancient evil? Why are they attacking? What is this like the whole birthing process, and like what conditions need to be met? Like, all kinds of stuff surrounding this. And I also think she did a great job on that. So even if she were to leave New York City alone and move to a different city, and we watched that city get born, all of that information I would take with me and really understand what's going on. So I do think that she just, overall world building was very, very well done. So next, let's talk about the characters. And the characters are a little strange to talk about because I walked away kind of feeling like they were underdeveloped, which makes sense. We did have a number of characters. There were like the 6 avatars for New York. There was the antagonist. There were a number of side characters, some of whom were actually pretty important. And so, like, there's just a lot of people to get to know. And honestly, we did have it was varying levels. Like we did spend more time with like the Bronx and Brooklyn and got to know them a little bit better. But like Queens, we spent hardly any time with her. And I don't feel like I knew her, which was sad because Queens is my favorite character. Um, but then I realized that like they weren't as underdeveloped as it kind of felt because a lot of their characterization was really propped up by the world building actually, because each avatar was chosen to become the embodiment of the borough, and we spent so much time building up what each borough feels like and who lives there and who works there and all this kind of stuff that we can take that and extrapolate like some of the things that this avatar is going to be. So we kind of know what Brooklyn is going to be like based off of what N.K. Jemisin has told us Brooklyn, the borough, is like. And so I think that actually worked out really well. It gave us enough information to really move the story along. And we didn't really need to have a lot of development of each individual character because this isn't an individual character kind of story. It's this group coming together as a team. And so, even though it did feel like the characters were a little underdeveloped, I think ultimately it really worked out just fine. So, next, let's talk about the plot. And so, the plot is actually pretty simplistic and straightforward. It's literally like find each other, defeat the ancient evil. I mean, there's like other things going on and roadblocks that are put in their way and everything, but I mean, that's really what it is. And I actually think that that also worked really well for this book because if we had gotten too complicated in the storyline, it really would have pulled attention away from this world building that needed to be done. And honestly, the draw for this book, at least for me, was that premise. And so if we had kind of fumbled the world building, the premise wouldn't have been as good. And you know what I mean? And so having, I wouldn't have wanted to do anything to pull attention away from the world building. And so I think that having a more simplistic plot did end up working out to this book's favor. Now, that being said, I will say that I did have a couple problems, and the first being that I never really felt any tension. So, like, they have to defeat this ancient evil, otherwise, the city is destroyed. That is a big bad thing. And I really never felt like they were going to fail. Like, regardless of whether they fail or not at the end, doesn't even matter because I never felt the tension along the way. And the other is that I did not love the ending. I think that it's like it's like N.K. Jemisin didn't quite stick the landing. There was a little wobble in there. There was like a few like one or two pieces where I wanted to like it, but it didn't quite work for me or honestly what I thought the story was doing. And so I like it was okay. It just wasn't quite as fabulous as I really wanted it to be. So next, let's talk about the pacing and the writing style. So the pacing is very slow, and it's partially because the writing itself is atmospheric and it can get lyrical in places, which actually does make a lot of sense because we're building up the feeling of each borough, which is atmospheric by its very nature, and it's really important that we do that. So like I completely understand. Although there were points where I was just like, it was a little bit much for me, although I'm not generally an atmospheric reader. Like that's not what calls to me. So take that opinion with a grain of salt. But it is a very atmospheric book and it does slow the pacing down quite a bit. The other thing that I will say about the writing style is the chapter length. The chapters are regularly 35 to 40 pages with no scene breaks. And like that's something I wish I had known going into this book because I would have read it. I would have planned my reading a little bit differently because it is sometimes difficult for me to find chunks of time like that to read. So there you go. Lastly, let's talk about diversity and the diversity representation. And I thought that generally speaking, the diversity representation was very good. We got a good mix of like almost everybody in this book is not white. So we definitely had like black characters. We had an Indian character. We had a Lenape character. We had somebody from Hong Kong, someone from Brazil, some of a British Vietnamese person. Like it was a large mix, and it was very very nice. Um, and then for queer rep, we definitely had like men loving men, women loving women, a trans character, so pretty decent rep there. And then there was other things as well, not as like um, uh, not forward, but like as noticeable, I guess you could say. But there was always like kind of an acknowledgement that even though they're not everybody is represented by all these characters, there is an acknowledgement that like we at least exist in the world, if that makes sense, which for some things an acknowledgement of existence is a step forward. So I did appreciate that too. And overall, I ended up giving this book 4.25 to 4.5 stars, somewhere in there. It's not a 4.25 star book and it's not a 4.5. It's somewhere in the middle. But I really liked it. The only reason I didn't rate it higher is because I don't always love atmospheric reads. I don't always love slow reads. So this was not like the perfect book for me, but it was still very, very good. And I would very much recommend this if you are interested in it. So let me know down below if you have read it, what you think of it, if you're interested in it, anything. But that's all I have. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And until next time, have happy reading, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.